All right, I got back and I got dry at last. That was really miserable. Now, I have been having a bunch. I just muted myself. I was just going to say I've been having a bunch of audio dramas because I went to start this and then it was using the audio in there and I wasn't using the audio in here. So I hate to be repetitive here, but if this sounds all right, like let me know. If it sounds crap, let me know. And then every time I put this on, then it would suddenly, like my levels on the recording would go up to 100% or something instead of where they were before. And it's like I'm having trouble computering today. So g'day, Burton and Dave. Thank you for joining in. Thanks for the sounding good. This is why we test before going to prod. So, speaking of all things techie, blog sponsor. I am doing the blog sponsor thing first these days. Brand new sponsor this week, Tynes. Breaches are inevitable and early detection is crucial. Assure yourself what's next with Security Automation Part 1. Spoiler, there are other parts coming. But what I really like about these guys is that they do use Have I Been Pwned, smart people, use Have I Been Pwned servers to trigger and initiate automated workflows. And this was actually kind of cool because when Tynes reached out, I was like, oh, I didn't know you were doing that. This is nice. It's nice to know that, first of all, someone gets use out of a feature of Have I Been Pwned, which I put out there for people to use for free. And second of all, that they're then willing to turn around and sponsor my blog to help me do the other things that I can put out there for free. So thank you for Tynes. Thank you to Tynes. Click on their link in the blog, or somewhere on my blog, if you would like to show your support, because it does look kind of cool, the stuff they're doing as well. Now, I got a heap of stuff today, and I have got some stuff which you might have read already, and I got other stuff which you haven't read already because I'm literally going to publish a blog post and go live with a big announcement during this update, so I get to see immediately what people's reactions are, and then you get to see my candid reaction to their reaction. So, can't hear if it's bad hair. I'm just looking at the comments here. Christian says, can't hear if it's bad audio or not on these crappy earphones. Not much I can do about that, mate. That's up to you. David, lighting was nice. I've only listened to the last episode, so I've heard about it. And interestingly, someone said the other day they didn't like the lighting. One person. So too bad, mate. It sticks. Like you're never going to make everybody happy. But I'm actually pretty happy with the lighting. I've been playing around with the Stream Deck a little bit, and I've changed a bunch of the buttons just to be toggles. And I was playing around. So watch the back wall, right? So particularly here, where it's a little bit lighter, when I put the panel lights on, where was it? There. When I put the panel lights on with one button click, I think it just lights up the background too much. I don't think it's really needed. And then I go off like that, just hitting the button on the Stream Deck, which, if you recall, the button on the Stream Deck calls a webhook hosted by Home Assistant, which then automates through into a power switch, which both these lights are plugged into courtesy of a double adapter. If you look under my desk, it's like adapter on switch. A lot of this stuff is actually plugged into the UPS, so it has surge protection, all the rest of it as well, but there is a lot of electronics there. Anyway, that's going pretty good. A lot more stuff coming in my home automation world as well. In fact, just today I put one of these Akera sensors on my desk with the intention being, wouldn't it be nice if when I walk into my office and the light is beneath a certain level and there's no lights on, that the lights went on? That'd be awesome. And wouldn't it be nice if I wasn't moving for a while that the lights went off? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this sucker probably just behind me there next to the Big Eddie Vey one. You won't even see it when I'm talking. And I'll wire that up, wirelessly that up tomorrow and make things happen automatically. So I'm still having a lot of fun with that. Still haven't wired up the bloody garage doors, which was the whole point of going down this rabbit hole in the first place. So I need to get to that. And then a few other bits. In fact, I'm really interested if anyone has any feedback, either listening to this now or commenting on the blog post later on, about good universal remote controls. So I'm redoing a bunch of my sort of home, it's not really home theater. I have some nice speakers and a nice TV, and that's about it. But redoing a bunch of that, I discovered that the receiver that I've been using for many years now, which is a fairly cheap Sony one, is actually crap at driving my really nice Crix speakers. So I'm going to get a new receiver for that. And then I've had a Logitech Harmony universal remote control for years, which has been, it's been okay 90% of the time. And I'd like to get from okay to good and then close the last bit. So I found a great store here on the Gold Coast, a great sort of home theater automation audio store. Folks there have been super helpful, and they recommended a control for Universal. So if you go control the number 4.com, Universal Remote, and this looks awesome. And it feels great. There's a big one here on the screen if you go to that URL. And then I went into the store today, and the guy's like, yeah, and what will happen is that this will then be the hub for all of your home automation things. And it's like, oh, great. So this will be, along with the Google stuff and the Amazon stuff and the Apple stuff, and also then Home Assistant is meant to do that as well. So do I need one more thing that's, look, stuff it. I'll just do it all with Home Assistant, and then I'll just program this up to integrate with that. And then he said, yeah, only we can program it. It's like, nope, thank you very much. That's not going to happen. The last thing I need is to have to go back to a store every time I want to do any sort of home automation. So if anyone has any good feedback for universal remote controls that are really nice, that have a combination of IR blaster and can control things over Wi-Fi, because one of the things I've learned is things like the new Anthem receiver, which I just bought, can actually be controlled over Wi-Fi, and they don't need IR, so then they don't need IR blasters as well. So any ideas on that, let me know. All right, now moving on. I have occasionally, haven't for probably the last couple of weeks, talked about what's happening in terms of our COVID situation and what we can and can't do down here. Well, things have been changing quite a bit, not always for the better, unfortunately. So the state that I'm in here, Queensland, so remember, this is a state that is twice the size of Texas, and it's not our largest state either. Twice the size of Texas. We've got 5.1 million people. We have literally been running on single-digit cases, active cases of COVID for probably the last couple of months now. So there just about are no masks worn anywhere, for example, because I don't even know what that percentage is, but when it's a single-digit number of people and over 5 million people in the state, you are literally more likely to be eaten by a bloody shark than to get COVID. And I still swim. So there's that. Now, unfortunately, our southern states have really gone downhill. So Victoria, state down at the bottom right, if you look at the map, a week ago, they were up to 6,000 active cases. And they've just had this outbreak over the last few weeks. They're now just about touching on 8,000 cases today. So they're in really serious lockdown now. They've actually got curfews. Not allowed out after 8 p.m. or before, I think it's 5 p.m. So, yeah, other than because you're dying or something like that. So that's pretty serious. And then the state in between, New South Wales, are up to 274 active cases now. And what we have actually now done in Queensland is reenacted border controls. So you literally cannot come across the border in a car anymore. Actually, there are some caveats. First of all, it's not till 1 a.m. tomorrow morning, which makes it better. Second of all, like people who live on the border, because we literally have the border splitting towns, they can get an exemption. But even for me as a Queenslander, if I was to drive to New South Wales, which is only half an hour away, I cannot drive back. I have to leave my car there, and then I have to fly. Now, that's a problem because I've got to go a long way south to get to an airport and then to fly back here, and then I've got to pay for 14 days of hotel quarantine. The only way I can drive from New South Wales to Queensland is I've got to drive west to South Australia, and then I've got to drive north to the Northern Territory. Now, each one of these leaps is probably 1,500 kilometres too. Up to the Northern Territory, then I can go from the Northern Territory into Queensland and pay for self-quarantine for 14 days. But I don't think South Australians are actually letting people from New South Wales in, which kind of defeats that purpose. So that has become quite the mess, and we are just effectively locking down for whoever knows how long, not within our own homes, but within our own state. So that sucks, but it is worse in other places, and we are very, very fortunate to be somewhere where, as of today, we've got 11 active cases, down one from yesterday. Data breaches. I've had a heap of data breaches. In fact, I just did the numbers today because I've put them in a new blog post. There's 16 data breaches that have gone into Have I Been Pwned in the last 14 days and approaching 100 million new records. Now, I thought I'd do is just have a spin through some of the ones just in the last week, because there have been some absolute zingers in here. So if I go back to, where are we? I guess the end of July, start of August. Oh boy. So let's just go August. Interior design website, Havenly, 1.4 million records, SHA-1 password hashes, so that's useless. And then we had Brazilian service, Vakina, 4.8 million records, Bcrypt password hashes. Okay, much better. 60% of them already in Have I Been Pwned. Then we had, many of you may be big fans of the Korean decoration website, and then Korean characters, which apparently translate through to decorating the house. 1.3 million records, no passwords. So they do OTP via, I believe, via either SMS or. So that's one way not to have your passwords leaked. You just don't have any. So that's a good thing. Guitar tuition website, TrueFi, 600,000 accounts, unsalted MD5. Like, seriously, what are you thinking? I think what they're thinking is, I reckon someone set up their website in 2010 and it worked. And then they just left it. And now 600,000 more people are in Have I Been Pwned, 74% of whom were already in there. Indonesian credit service, Credit Plus, 896,000 records. So that was quite a lot. A whole bunch of info on spouses as well. Religions. I've just realized I can't spell religion. Shows how much I know about religion. And the only reason I know I can't spell it is because the spell check kept telling me I was wrong when I loaded the one today, which I'll come back to in a moment. Then one I put in yesterday, because I kept getting all these questions about it, was Proctoru. Now, Proctoru does online exams. So I had a bunch of people from universities, particularly in Australia, reaching out and going, hey, is this going to go into Have I Been Pwned? Because we're kind of worried about it. We're going to have a bunch of people from our university there. So they had, fortunately, nothing to do with exams, but email and physical addresses, names, phones, Bcrypt, good on you, password hashes, 2/3 of those are in Have I Been Pwned. And then the one that was the real zinger today is Zusk. And Zusk is interesting because there is already a Zusk in Have I Been Pwned from 2011, which was flagged as unverified. And this data was floating around. I loaded it long after 2011 because, of course, Have I Been Pwned didn't exist until late 2013. But I loaded it, and at the time I went, look, there's a bunch of data in here which is legit insofar as it is people's real personal information. However, there's not enough evidence to suggest it actually comes from Zusk. I couldn't reliably attribute it back, so I was flagged as unverified. Fast forward to January this year, and they did have a data breach. 24 million people in there, and the amount of data that was exposed about these people is just crazy. So if I go into Have I Been Pwned and I look at the latest breach here, and it actually tells me the fields, actually, when I go to Who's Been Pwned and I look for Zusk, this will be the second Zusk because there's now two Zuskas. Zusks. Compromised data. Dates of birth, drinking habits, education level, email addresses, ethnicities, family structure, genders, geographic locations, income levels, names, nicknames, physical attributes, which incidentally is a bit of a bucket for multiple different things that are in there. Your height, your weight, and I think there's an attribute called body shape, which is a lookup table to something else. So the lookup table isn't in there, but the values were there. You would be able to inevitably de-anonymize or resolve those values. Political views, relationship statuses, religion, sexual orientations, smoking habits. Now, the other thing that was in there, and I kind of need to update these attributes a little bit, is there kind of were passwords. And it was a very strange thing, actually, because in their disclosure, they said there were passwords, but then in the breach data, there was a separate table, in fact, a separate file, inevitably dumped from a separate table with passwords. But it was weird because it was like there were SHA-1 hashes, but the SHA-1 hashes were of an email address on the same line. And then the email address on that line was an MD5 hash followed by something like @chat1.zusk.com. And then the column which was flagged as password was nulled out. And then reading some of the Hacker Forum comments, it sounds like other people are a bit confused as well, but I'm not quite sure what the deal was there. So if anyone knows what actually happened inside that Zusk data, let me know. Now, in terms of all the exposed personal information, but one of the things that kind of strikes me with this is, yes, it's a lot of personal information. However, if you were on a dating site and you were trying to find a partner, this is all kind of, well, maybe not all, but mostly kind of relevant too. Political views, you probably want to find people with the same views as you. Religion, you probably want to find someone with the same philosophical or theological beliefs. Told you I didn't know much about it. Same with sexual orientations, that is something which is very relevant to a dating site. Smoking habits. So all of this is super, super relevant, but it's a massive amount of data in one place to then lose. And it's the same situation, I guess, with the Ashley Madison breach in 2015. That was really, really sensitive. And I'll tell you what, not many more records than this as well. The only thing that's probably quite different is Ashley Madison was much more around having affairs. Zusk is much more about finding a life partner, something like that. So anyway, that was not great. Anyway, reading some of the comments here. Let me just see if there's anything that's actually relevant to comment on here. If anything else wasn't enough, another reason not to use dating websites. How do I feel about that? I would be reticent myself to say this online because people would get upset and they'd say you're victim blaming. People should be able to use dating websites. And I'm sure that we all believe that people, yes, should be able to use dating websites. I imagine that that is something that would be a big part of dating these days. So I don't want to decry people that. I just struggle with the concept of having to put that much personal information in a site when I know there are data breaches all the time. Julian, I really like this time slot for weekly update. Good way to wake up, enjoy my morning coffee. Yep, good on you. So I've mentioned before, I'm just sort of alternating them. So I'm doing, every 2 weeks I do it at the end of the day. So for context here, it's 20 to 6 in the evening here. And then next week I'll do it in the morning, and then it just kind of hits different time zones. All right, so next thing, the blog post today about Nord. So I knew I was going to get some interesting feedback on this one. So going back a couple of months ago now, I think, Nord sponsored my blog for a few weeks. Now, Nord, most people know as a VPN provider. There is a parent company called NordSec, which does things that are other related things other than VPNs as well. And when they reached out, we started having a bit of a chat because Nord's one of these companies that I have seen a lot of in terms of their placement and their marketing. So they've sponsored a whole heap of YouTubers and influencers and things like that who frankly have nothing to do with security, but they've got influence and they've got a lot of traction. They've got something like 14 million customers. But I was also conscious that occasionally their marketing has, in my view, missed the mark as well. So there has been over-embellishment of what a VPN can do. I think particularly in an era where we're getting to encrypted by default, we've got 80-something% of all web pages loaded over the internet, according to Firefox telemetry these days, are HTTPS. That does change the risk factors a bit. The marketing needs to reflect that. But there are lots of other things that are really useful for VPNs as well, and particularly useful things that they do around traffic routing, which I'll get into another time. So there's like good stuff that the product does, but then you get some of this marketing which is off-key. They had a security incident last year, which in and of itself wasn't a major thing, but then the messaging around it wasn't great. And we had quite a good chat about this, Tom and myself, and Tom was one of the co-founders of the company. And it was actually really interesting. I was like, what you're doing is actually really cool. It just kind of needs like some tweaking in the right direction. And then he said, look, would I be interested in being, I'm going to air quote it, a strategic advisor, because it sounds really fancy, and basically devote a bit of time each month to looking at where they're going with the product, how they're communicating the product, and where they can basically do a better job of what they're doing. And at the end of the day, that the goal is security and privacy and making that more accessible to people, and just being clear about what are the things that a VPN actually does well for you, and what are the things that you probably don't need a VPN for. So I went, all right, that sounds okay. We can give that a go. So we sort of worked around the shape of what that would look like, and I'll talk more about that as we progress over the coming weeks and month. And I announced that today. And for the most part, I'm actually surprised the feedback was really good. Now, I say I'm surprised because there's a couple of things that people tend to get uppity about on the internet. And one is, as soon as there's money involved in something, they're a little bit like, what's going on? Like how much of this is legit? How much can I trust you or not? And I've written before about how I choose, the things that I want to endorse and the things I want to be involved in. Never going to make everyone happy, and that's fine, but at least I'm transparent about it. So that was one thing. And of course, the other thing was, because some of Nord's marketing has been a little too enthusiastic at times, and the security thing as well. I knew I was going to have a bit of feedback along those lines. But I'm actually pretty impressed. Most of it was actually really good. Some of the comments there, most of the comments were pretty good. One bloke's a bit upset. This bloke's a bit upset. Sebastian Bork. Sebastian was, and I think I can name Sebastian because he is in the comments. Sebastian was a bit upset because in my blog post where I wrote about partnering with Nord, which was an announcement about partnering with Nord, I didn't talk about the security incident they had last year as if somehow I was trying to cover it up. And it's like, no, mate, it's like this is not a blog post about a thing that happened last year any more than it is a blog post about some of the marketing I think they need to clean up. This is a blog post about we're going to go and do some stuff together, and then I'll talk about the other stuff later on. But it's the internet. People have very strong views on these things. One of the things I noticed, just looking at the notes I made over today, is that I'm trying to put this in a way that doesn't throw people under the bus. There was a very consistent pattern of people who made negative comments having like hexadecimal usernames on Twitter or strange avatars or very leet speak hackery sort of stuff. And I'm actually a bit curious as to what it is. Maybe they're just a bit like naturally tinfoil hat and conspiracy theorists. Maybe there's something else, but it was just a really consistent pattern there, which I found a little bit odd. What I will say in Nord's favor, what I think they're doing well here is that regardless of how you view the marketing and the security incident last year and that sort of stuff, they're taking people like me on board. There'll be other people. I don't know who they're going to be. I've had no indication of that. So they're serious about that. They're going out and getting independent audits from PwC, which had cost a ton of money, like absolutely no doubt, to prove that there's no logging. They're taking that very seriously. They run a bug bounty program with HackerOne. That is a really good thing. Like they're ticking the boxes that I suspect you and certainly I want them to tick. So they're trying to go in the right direction. And, you know, look, let's see what I can do. Let's just wait and see the results. If I can have a positive impact, then that's great. If I feel that I can't, then I'll go and do something else or sit on the beach or something like that. All right, so let me have a look at the comments on this. Shane says, always feels deceptive when they appear to claim to completely hide your activity online. Feels like it could lead someone to posting something on social media thinking it's magically anonymous. I don't want a situation where someone uses Nord to like VPN in and goes onto a forum and leaves some dickish comment and puts their name and email address at the bottom of it, and thinks they're anonymous. And I know that sounds obvious to people here, but I can see it's the sort of thing that people who just really don't understand how these things actually work would fall for. In the same way as I don't want people thinking, if I go into incognito mode in Chrome, I can go and just be a dick anywhere. It's like, this doesn't really work that way. Tracy, are you exclusive to Nord now? Are you using 2 VPNs now? Well, I'm not using 2 at once, put it that way. So I've been using Freedome for years, and I've been very public about using Freedome, mostly because I know Mikko Hyppinen quite well, and Mikko's a good bloke, and I trust Mikko. I have no reason not to use Freedome other than the fact that I'm now doing the thing with Nord, and I've been very happy with what I'm doing with them. I will say that Nord do seem to have a lot more edge nodes around the world. That's a fact. It's not an endorsed thing. They don't pay me for saying that. But yeah, I have nothing against Freedome. Troy, I hope you're giving them Nord feedback on these ads, like watching the Unix reference in Jurassic Park. I haven't seen that. Is that the one like, this is a Unix system? I know this. That if they're using that I would really be interested in seeing the context. But I have already pointed them at a few things which I think are unnecessary in the marketing. I have suggested to them that if we were to be able to fix that really quickly, that would be a really good sign that a positive difference is being made. So let's see where we go there. Just put that little carrot out there. I hope you're having a beer now. I am. No, I'm literally having a glass of water. So there may be beer that follows, but I've got something really important I want to talk about. It's got nothing to do with Nord first, and I want to keep all my wits about me on that one. Julian, everyone knows you need at least 7 proxies, VPNs to be secure and anonymous. I think part of the really interesting challenge here, I always think about my mum and dad. So they're in their 70s. Dad's a bit more technical than mum. He was a pilot, so he was used to a lot of controls and gauges and, and stuff like that. But I always think, like, how would I pitch any sort of technology, privacy, security control to them? So how would I pitch 1Password, for example, to them? Now, I've got Dad on 1Password. I've got Mum on a notebook. That's the best I could do. I tried. But how would I explain it to them? How would I explain it to my non-technical, non-security-centric other friends? And I have a lot of ideas in my mind about how I pitch something like a VPN and where I think there's value, but I really want to spend more time on focusing on that. One of the things that, well before even the Nord relationship, I'd been discussing with Ubiquity, someone else I have a relationship with, I said, I would love to see a point where at, say, the Unified Security Gateway, at that network layer, I'd love to be able to see VPN tunnels from there to a provider. Like, I should get these guys together. I can get Nord and Ubiquity together. I'd love to see that level of configuration where it's like, hey, turn on your VPN and then get a whole bunch of advantages around things like traffic routing, which is some of the other cool things Nord's doing, which we'll talk about later on, and then get the privacy and the security and all this sort of stuff that a VPN provides you, not the stuff that some people think it does, which it doesn't actually do. I'd love to be able to get that there at the network layer. I think that would be super cool. And then, of course, with inside that, having as much HTTPS as possible and DNS over HTTPS and all this sort of stuff too, which is becoming increasingly ubiquitous. Apparently, that is also in the latest Windows 10 Insider build, the ability to force DNS over HTTPS, which is pretty cool. Burton, to be extremely anonymous, it's extremely hard. To be extremely anonymous, to be truly anonymous, it's extremely hard. I think the word truly is a bit absolute. And what we should be thinking about, particularly, all right, so you know, Nord's got 14 million subscribers. Inevitably, a bunch of them are like normal everyday folks who want to have more privacy than what you get otherwise. What is the right commensurate level? And when you think about all the different levels, I mean, in private mode, as Edge would call it, gives you, or Firefox calls it that, would give you a degree of privacy, but we all know it's not very much because your source IP address, for example, is still there. It doesn't give you any transport layer encryption, this sort of thing. That is enough for some people for some purposes. There are some things I Google, I'm just happy to do within private mode because I don't really want Google then giving me suggestions for it later on. There are other things I do, even verifying data breaches where I go and do a password reset on a Mailinator account. I VPN for, because I really don't want my IP address associated with that, not because it's illegal, but I'd like that degree of anonymity. So where is the right commensurate level? I think the truly anonymous bit, there are people that need that for both legitimate and illegitimate reasons, and I'm sure we're going to go down this rabbit hole sometime as well, that the whole sort of moral neutrality of encryption and VPNs and the fact that they can be used for good and can be used for bad, and we got to, you know, somehow try and steer people in the good path, but also recognize that when you use it for bad, unless you're sort of inspecting traffic, it gets very hard. Anyway, we'll come back to all that. A few other things here. Cam has a question about pwned passwords. What new passwords get added to have I been pwned? Only clear text breaches or bad hash passwords. I only put clear text stuff in there simply because I need clear text because I then create NTLM out of that and I create SHA-1 out of that and I need clean input. So I need clear text input. So I need either breaches in clear text or I need people to have cracked hashes and then they go in there. Paul, I was just about to ask if you can use NordVPN at the network level. So yeah, look, this is one of the discussions we're having. I'd love to see that ability. So stay tuned on that. We will come back to that one. David, I can't even pitch using a password manager to my developer colleagues. So explaining anything security, what's their email addresses? I'll have a look. I'll see if I can convince them. Actually, plug them into Have I Been Pwned, in all seriousness. And I find that usually helps. Completely stupid question. Have you seen the Marble Run channel? No. Your mic is on the side is a lot better than last time, by the way. Look, I'm still playing with positioning of everything. The nice thing about this camera and lens is the facial tracking is pretty good. So it's not really focusing on the mic. It does actually pick up my face and keeps it in focus. I know we're jumping around a little bit here, but I'm going to get something pretty cool in a moment. Leonardo, sadly things other VPNs are doing tends to make people think every VPN provider does the same thing, which kind of makes the marketing even more challenging to make sure people know what to expect. And this is hard, right? Because every whether you're a VPN provider or something else in the security space, everyone's jumping up saying we've got something awesome and it's great. And I've said many, many times, and of course we don't do this anymore, but many, many times after walking around at somewhere like RSA conference or InfoSec EU in London, I feel so sorry for people that have to make purchasing decisions about security products. Like, imagine some poor IT manager or CISO and they're wandering around and they're like, everything here says it's going to fix every one of my problems. Like, what do I do? I saw at InfoSec EU in London last year a stand with a company selling next-gen blockchain. You could buy next-gen blockchain. How the hell are you meant to figure out what next-gen blockchain does and if you actually need it? So it's very, very hard to verify claims. And as I put in this announcement blog post earlier today, the first tweet I embedded in here was a story about a whole bunch of VPN apps which say we don't log data, having a data breach, and then 1.2 terabytes worth of user data on 20 million people leaked. Now, how do you make that decision? And I know we're sort of coming full circle back to the Nord thing, but Big Four is a really, really good step in the right direction to creating consumer confidence. But that's the messaging that's really valuable, that the messaging about maybe your credit cards get stolen if you're on a train and we're inevitably using an HTTPS website, like that to me is not where the value is. The value is in actually having verifiable claims. I'm joining late. Thank you. Please don't be late next time. Hello from soggy and lockdown cold Victoria. Well, I'm soggy here on the Gold Coast too. It has been pretty wet here. What's your favorite whiskey? I have had a couple lately. So Hellier's Road I quite like, from Tasmania, which is, and I'm going to pick Aussie ones here. The Hellier's Road's been very good. Had some Lime Burners from WA recently too. That was quite nice. But I am trying to limit the whiskey and the beer and everything. Mike's suggestion, have you considered lapel mic? Less distracting, good sound quality, and solves vibration issues. Nowhere near as good as something like this. And I do have lapel mics, and I've got some decent Rode lapel mics in the cupboard over there, but absolutely nowhere near as good. Scott, house over the password manager. How does LastPass compare? So password managers are not absolutely safe. Shock horror. Something can go wrong. The way to look at password managers, in my mind, is you've got to compare security postures. And when people come along and they go, I don't want to use a password manager because what happens if it gets breached? It's like, well, firstly, as an easy answer, if it gets breached, you're screwed, right? Like, this is assuming complete breach and someone gets everything in there. Second of all, if we do any sort of risk assessment, there's going to be a question of likelihood. Now, the likelihood of, say, a one-password password manager that's managed correctly, strong master password, looking after your key, well, you don't really have a keychain now because it all syncs on cloud, looking after your secret key to set the thing up, having 2FA enabled on it, patching your operating system, not installing dodgy stuff. All of that stuff contributes towards the strength of password manager. So your likelihood comes way, 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 way down. Your impact is high, likelihood very low. How does LastPass compare? I honestly haven't used LastPass for many, many years. I did see that they have just implemented a pwned password sort of thing. That is going to be in the blog post. A reference to that is in the blog post I'm just about to publish. So you'll see that in a moment. All right. So, all right. You know what? I'm going to go on to something new here. So this is something completely different. There's going to be a never before done thing where I'm going to push the publish button on a blog post live, because I want to be able to talk about it here, and I want to be able to talk, or rather see, what people's opinions are. 1, 2, 3, go. Blog post live. Is it actually out? Let me have a look. Paste. Reload. It is live. Okay. I'm open sourcing the Have I Been Pwned code base. Ta-da! Big announcement. So let me talk about this, because this is kind of a major thing for me in many ways, and I want to sort of talk about the background of this. So Have I Been Pwned has made me a bit busy. I was talking about all the breaches before. There's a lot of stuff to do, and originally I started this out with no expectation of anything other than to keep myself amused for a bit and to make something I thought a few of my mates would use. And I thought, oh, this will be fun. This will be a fun little project. I can build some cloud, use some Azure. And it turned out to be popular. And everything that has happened with Have I Been Pwned has been accidental in one way or another. Now, maybe that's a little bit disingenuous. I do give it a lot of thought, but it's been accidental insofar as I didn't sit here with a master plan and go, I'm going to build a really big data breach service and it's going to be famous and people are going to think it's awesome. I'm over embellishing a little bit, but you get what I mean. It wasn't a plan. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of the volumes of data and the time commitment. And this is what drove me to that M&A process earlier last year, the merger and acquisition process, where I went, look, it's gotten to the size where I need someone to help me do this. And my feeling at the time, and I still think this was right based on the information I had at the time, was the best way to do that was to find a new home for it. So find a company that was willing to take it on board. So this is why I engaged KPMG back in April last year. I wrote about it at the time. We called it Project Spellbar. We went through a really, really intense process to try and find a home for it. And we got all the way up to sort of the wire, if you like, with an organization who we thought was a very good fit. And then, as I've written before, there were what, due to confidentiality reasons, I have to describe as a change in business operating model that happened that killed the whole thing. So we got through to, I think it was Feb that I learned about this. Yeah, it was. Got through to Feb. We're in, okay, look, the whole thing's off. There were no other good fits. This organization was never going to work because of the way their model changed. And I was kind of back at square one. And one of the things that had come up a lot throughout the M&A process, in particular as I talked to people about the stress of trying to manage the thing, is I said, look, just open source it. And, get the community to look after it, she'll be right. Now, the problem is it's not really that trivial. You don't just go, okay, well, here's the keys to the GitHub repo and everyone just goes off. It is a lot more complex than that for many reasons, and some of them I'm going to talk about just here. But one of the things that I really sort of kept coming back to this year as I thought more about it is that this really is a very community-centric project. So that the whole idea of it was to make something freely available to people so that anyone could go and use it, and then rely on, or ultimately end up relying on, contributions from the community in order to keep feeding data into it. And that wasn't the plan either, because originally I thought, I'll just go and pick up data breaches when they float around. And the reality of it is that people became so supportive of the project that they sent it to me. And I kind of made the point in this blog post that over the last 14 days, there's been 16 breaches and 90-something million records, all from people sending it to me because they trust me to do the right thing. Now, that's great, but it sort of reiterates the fact that the thing only exists due to community support. So let me move on and talk about some of the things I put here in the blog post. And I appreciate that I'm sort of talking live. Some of you are probably reading this at the same time. I got a little reminder of this in here. I mentioned LastPass just before, the fact that they'd implemented a K-anonymity model, which is very similar to the one which Janard, my mate from Cloudflare, built for Have I Been Pwned. This is part of the Pwned password service. And I embedded this tweet here because I really like the fact that, number one, because Janard's a good bloke, he did this, I'm sure a lot of it on his own time, and what wasn't done on his own time was done on Cloudflare's time, and they supported him to do that, not to help me, but to help everyone else who now uses it. And I checked the other day, we're up to about 27 million requests a day to pwn passwords from organizations now using it to block bad passwords. Good on them, awesome. Good on Janard, good on Cloudflare. That's a contribution that they've made that now I'm sure, because he's mentioned LastPass, 1Password, Okta, PassProtect, Apple, Google, etc. I'm sure many of these organizations, and some of them I have spoken to, I won't say which ones, have taken at least that concept in his good work and reapplied it as a result of what he did. So they've now made that available to the community. The whole thing goes around. Share the love. So that was really important to me. I sort of got a bolded out paragraph here, sentence, where I said, the philosophy of Have I Been Pwned has always been to support the community. Now I want the community to help support Have I Been Pwned. So I'm looking for people who will ultimately help support the thing. Now, a few sort of points I've pointed out here, because I'm conscious that a bunch of different people from different backgrounds who have varying levels of technical, infosec competency, and various levels of familiarity with the whole concept of open source as well will read this. So I'm trying to explain why I've done this and what it means. And part of this was about, in spirit, like Have I Been Pwned has always been a very open system. So I've written very, very transparently about a heap of stuff I've done with the structure of the system. I forgot to mention it here, but I did this big infographic once, and it was literally like, here is every component of effectively the platform. So all of the Cloudflare bits and the Have I Been Pwned bits. What's a web job? There weren't functions at the time, but now what's a function? Table storage here, blob storage there, Azure SQL over there. The whole thing's been very transparent, and it's been good because people have taken that and then they've gone away and built other systems based on the blog post and the limited amounts of code that I've put out there in the post. But the intention has always been to have the thing open and transparent. Got another heading here, open sources everywhere. And I actually asked a question on Twitter to sort of, you might notice I've started embedding a lot of tweets in my blog posts because I just think it makes it more interesting and engaging. But I wanted to get some good quotes from people. What are good open source projects? Open source projects that we all use all the time. Someone said here, Chromium. All right, that's a pretty good example. Okay, maybe not Chrome itself, but Chromium as the basis of not just Chrome these days, but of course Edge as well. Later on, someone mentions Firefox, of course. WordPress, Wikipedia, Home Assistant, which I've been spending so much time on lately. Thunderbird, VirtualBox. Mate of mine here, Dylan Beatty, he says, does Android count? Does anyone use that? It's like, yeah, hell. I mean, that's just a massive thing. Linux, of course, being a very obvious one. GitHub, Drupal. And it's not that mind you, I did use Drupal. I did develop on Drupal for quite a while there. But I use so many websites that are based on Drupal. And all of these things are there and successful due to the nature of being open source. We've got another heading here because transparency. And really, this has sort of been the whole point of Have I Been Pwned for so long, is to be transparent about the way it operates. I'm very transparent about the government usage of it. I've been very transparent about commercial uses of it. I've made a comment here. I'm very transparent when I screw it up and have system outages because I got smashed by traffic before. These are the things I learned and the things I did differently. I've said it's almost all about the contributions. And I didn't want it to be source open in terms of, hey, have a look at the code. Here it is, but you can't touch it. I want to get to the point where people are actually contributing code back to it because, frankly, I want other people to maintain it. And as I've said in here, I want to make myself redundant to some extent. Because if I walk out there and I have an unfortunate drop bear accident, like who looks after it? And at the moment, the answer is kind of no one. Actually, in all seriousness, I did update my will recently, and I have nominated someone to actually take over all of my digital assets. And I very explicitly pointed out things like Have I Been Pwned and my blog. So I have thought about who's going to be accountable in the unfortunate occurrence of a drop bear accident, but that doesn't really solve the problem. This poor bastard's going to have a lot to do. So what I want to do is I do want to get those contributions, and it's not just for sustainability, but I want the thing to grow because, quite frankly, I haven't done a lot with it in the last few years. Like, I've put a lot of data in, but I haven't really done a lot in terms of features. The last thing I can think I actually did, and this was mostly Jannard because he did it all in Cloudflare Workers, was implement the padding on pwned passwords. Probably the last thing I did before that of any note was a year ago, which was the API, now having an API key and having to chuck your credit card into Stripe. So there's that. Now, all of this is good in theory. In practice, it is going to take some work. And in simple terms, the reason why is because it's just not in the point now I can just open up the repository. So as I said in this blog post, I started writing this literally on an airplane when I was heading to the Philippines, nearly 7 years ago now. I think I started in October or November 2013. And I never expected it to be, number one, successful, and number two, other people having access to the code. Even just think about it off the top of my head, there's There are multiple solutions because there are different parts of the project. So, for example, all the functions and serverless stuff sits in one project over there, totally unrelated, not even sharing libraries to the actual web app itself, which has just become an absolute behemoth of a solution and a shitload of projects, including a bunch of web jobs that really need to be migrated to functions. It is a bit of a mess. I'm sure I've checked in secrets at some point or another, because you can get away with that when you're one person doing it, even though you probably really shouldn't. And I have over time rotated those just to make sure. So the point is that it has legacy of being a pet project with one person running it as a closed source project. I now need to transition it to the point where people can start to access manageable components of it, start to fix bugs, contribute new things, and then even get the whole release process to a point where it can operate as an open source project. So I began talking to people about that, and I am starting to go down that road, but I've also said, look, at the end of the day, this is something I have to run in my spare time. I have other work I need to do. The Nord stuff is just one of those things. So I need to try and do this in my own time. I can't put a date and a time on what stuff is going to happen when, but I'm also conscious that by writing this, other people are going to pop out and offer even more support. And if you're one of those people who particularly lives in this ecosystem, and especially in the early days, someone that I know and trust, a lot of randos on Twitter, that would really, really be helpful. I'm going to come back and have a spin through these comments later on as well. I can see them scrolling up the screen. Now, I've got a point here. What about the data? Now, the data, first of all, there's a lot of it. Second of all, the data, as I've said in here, and let me just read the statement because it's easier. There's no way to sugarcoat this, so I'll lay it out bluntly. Have I been pwned only exists due to a whole bunch of criminal activity resulting in data that's ultimately ended up in my possession. Of course, the situation is a bit more nuanced than that, with the vast bulk of data in Have I Been Pwned already being in broad public circulation and passing through many hands. Just as an example, every one of those 16 data breaches from the last 14 days is very extensively shared on popular hacking forums. And in fact, in some ways, I kind of feel like the last person to have my hands on it. But the point is that it's out there. Be that as it may, even the legality of possessing it remains grey. And whilst there are many internet armchair experts chiming in with their own opinions on the topic, here's what the legal guidance I've consistently been given boils down to. We invite parties to form their own opinion on the legality of the data. And that is literally what I kept getting from KPMG as I went through this M&A process. It is super, super grey. There are questions around the Australian Office of Information Commissioner and privacy laws in Australia. There are questions around GDPR. There are questions about CCPA. There are questions about all the other regulations in the different parts of the world. And none of it actually solves the underlying problem of all our data floating around. So the point I'm making is that the data itself is definitely not something which I'm just going to go, yeah, we'll just chuck all that in a GitHub repository and people get access to it. I need to make sure that the data itself is still protected, even as other people start contributing to the source. And I kind of made a point here, even the big tech companies have a lot of this data. I'm sure people actually understand this anyway, but let's just say most of the major big tech companies have all of this data, and then they use it against their credential list to make sure that people aren't subject to account takeovers and things like this. I know they have it because I've spent a lot of time with the people that have it. All right, so that's basically where we're at. Now I'm going to have a read through some of these comments in here because I know that a few of them have spun through here. Give me some time to read this. Nice. I'm just trying to pick ones that are relevant to actually read. But does it need more features? I have a big feature list. And in fact, there is a user voice where people make requests. Now, I'll give you a really good example of two features that people would love. Number one, the number one most requested feature is the ability to deal with plus aliasing. Now, if you're not familiar with plus aliasing, if you are john@gmail.com and you sign up for Netflix, you might use an email address which is john+netflix@gmail.com. And John might do this so that if he gets spammed to that address later on, he can point the finger at Netflix. Now, John is very passionate about plus aliasing, and there are a lot of other Johns out there who do the same sort of thing. The problem with Have I Been Pwned is that I just take an email address and I go, this is an email address, and I load it in. I don't go, oh, John's using plus aliasing, I need to do something different. And there are multiple reasons for it. So, and this is all in the user voice, by the way. But One of the reasons is there is no RSC or formal spec or anything like that for plus aliasing. Just because Gmail does it, and Microsoft Outlook does it, and a bunch of others do it as well. But it doesn't mean that everyone does it, and it doesn't mean that john+netflix@gmail.com is the same as john@gmail.com in just the same way as john+netflix@acmecore.com is the same as john@acmecore.com. You get what I mean? It doesn't mean that everyone follows the same standard. The other thing is, what's important to John is that he can subscribe john@gmail.com and get told when john+netflix@gmail.com is breached, and also that it was John plus Netflix, not John plus something else. So the context of where the plus aliasing appeared is important, which means that you need to carry that paradigm through into the underlying data storage model. So you've got to be able to say, have a normalized john@gmail.com, and somewhere on that John record, go through and say, well, yes, he was using plus aliasing with Netflix here, and this was the breach it appeared against. I hope that makes sense. And that then leads us down the path to, I would actually like to have a more sustainable model than table storage. And I do have a thought about how to do this. But this is one of the things which is a really, really big feature request. One of the reasons it hasn't been done yet, and you'll see this in the comment in the user voice as well, is consistently when I look to see how many people are using this in a new data breach, it is about 0.03% of people. John's passionate about it, but there's not many Johns, not relatively speaking. Now, another example, this keeps coming up. I put that API key there last year where you had to pay $3.50 a month, which effectively would take me to zero based on the overheads that I factored in at the time. Turns out I was wrong and I actually make money out of it, but that is a different story. It wasn't by design. It's rate limited, one request every 1.5 seconds. I consistently get people say two big things. Can we pay more money for a higher rate limit? Can we pay for a year rather than month by month? I have people popping up all the time saying, our procurement department would like you to answer a questionnaire and fill out all these documents so that we can pay $3.50 a month. No, no, I'm not going to do it. You can dig in your own bloody pocket for $3.50 a month before I spend hours and hours of my time sitting there filling out your documents. Might be different if we could do an annual thing. So those two things come up. I'd like to be able to do that. There are some challenges around that because the rate limit is there for a very good reason, but they're legitimate requests. So to the question about, do you actually need any more features on it? Well, yeah, there are lots of other good ideas there. Okay. So what else is in the questions just here? Drop bear anyone? Yeah. Does it work for wills and sharing passwords, etc.? So this is what is part of my will around. It's basically like digital survivorship. And I know we're kind of off topic here, but it is a really interesting thing to think about. This is not fun, but if you die, what happens to your digital things? Who should look after your Facebook account? If you've, and maybe this is your partner, for example, right? Easy answer. If you do have any technical projects, who should look after your technical projects? Because you might find that your partner is not in the technical space and is equipped to do that. So it is an interesting thing to think about. And you got to think about it before you're dead. I know that's a morbid thought, but that is the whole point of wills. It's like, if I die, this is what I want to happen. There is another discussion as well, which is around things like power of attorney. So if I'm incapacitated, what do I want to happen? And they're not fun things to think about, but if you got time to kill because you're at home, you can't go anywhere else, that's a good thing to get on top of. Okay, anonymity is awesome concept. Yes, I think it is awesome as well. What else have we got here? Keen to know Troy's view on the hide aliases that Apple and others are now providing. So Apple announced at was it at WWDC or does it even go further back than that? But they basically announced the idea of being able to sign up to services where they will hide your email address and they will do some sort of magic Apple proxying in between. I need to look at it more to have an informed opinion of it. But the thing that sort of immediately struck me was that, first of all, you have merchants, let's say it's merchants because you sign up to buy stuff, who do want to have direct relationships with customers. They don't always want Apple there in the way. And this is one of the things that merchants have been very upset about with things like in-app purchases, where Apple really wants you to do the whole Apple Pay thing and basically get their slice of the pie. And then organizations are like, you're just the big guy, like smashing down on the little guy. So I think that's a bit of a problem. I think there's a little bit of a problem too, because you then do put a lot of trust in Apple to then know all of the places that you have the accounts. So look, I'm neutral enough on the topic not to have strong views of it one way or the other. I myself, because I have a password manager, I just, even if I'm given like the option of social login, I just always create a new account, and it just goes into one password with a strong password. What else we got here? Now, Christian Jackson made a good point. He said if they want a higher rate, they can just subscribe multiple times. I got an email yesterday, I kid you not, it was within the last 24 hours from, I won't say who it is, but it was an organization that has had a breach. And they asked if they could buy 100 API keys, and if it was okay for them to just go and manually sign up to 100 API keys. Now, first of all, I would hate to be the poor bastard who has to do that, who has to sit there and enter the credit card details. Please use something like 1Password where you can automatically complete credit card details, but to do that 100 times over. And there are actually a lot of organizations that use plus aliasing themselves. And I see they have, it'd be like John plus have I been pwned 1 at gmail.com, John plus have I been pwned 2 at instead of gmail.com, it's like acmecore.com. And if I look at the objectives of why I put the purchasing an API key in there, it was to stop, I think malicious is not quite the right word. Let's say unethical use. Use in a way where in the past I would see someone getting loads of IP addresses across loads of ASNs, randomizing user agent strings, but then clearly working through the alphabet of email addresses on all sorts of different domains they're testing. That stuff is not cool. So that's what I really wanted to cut out. Now, if it is acmecore.com and acmecore.com is a legitimate organization and they're simply saying, look, we've just got a larger range of email addresses that we want to try and query, I think that makes for a worthy discussion. So I'm okay with the idea of increasing the rate limit on that, but I just need to think more, as part of the reason I haven't done it yet, about do I just allow someone to turn the dial and attach it directly to the money, or is there a better way of doing that? What else we got here? All right, so I think I got to the end of the comments there. If you have any other comments or questions or things about any of the things I've discussed today, then let me know. And I guess just to sort of start rounding it out, the have I been pwned, but I'm super excited about. I'm just not entirely sure yet how to do it exactly. So again, there's a few people I'm speaking to already who are really good in this space. I'm sure there'll be others that pop up. And one of the things that I'm leaning towards is just trying to decompose the application more. So, a good example of that is the API component to query email addresses and to do so by needing a valid subscription and everything. That's the sort of thing that I can sort of segment more. In fact, it's pretty well segmented as it is. It's just sitting in a functions app with other things as well. But it's the sort of thing where I should be able to go, let's just pick up that bit and we'll put that over there. And we'll start by open sourcing that bit. I would really like people to make it more efficient. Because if you could make it more efficient, my Azure bill would go down. And I don't think any of this changes the fact that I've got to pay an Azure bill either. So I'd like to sort of see that. I'll give you another good example for people that are living in the .NET space. It's still all ASP.NET Web Forms. None of it is MVC Core, or none of it is .NET Core. So that was just simply not a leap that I have been willing to take in terms of the time investment to do it. But if I could take one bit out of that and someone goes, yeah, this is actually a pretty simple API, I will spend an afternoon knocking that up and turning it into .NET Core. Sweet, I'd love to do that. So they're the sorts of things that I really hope to get traction on pretty soon. All right, so I realized that I never actually wrote like a launch tweet for that bit about open sourcing Have I Been Pwned. So I'm going to drop off now. I'm going to write that launch tweet. I'm going to publish that, drop it on the Facebook as well. And I appreciate everyone joining in. And someone did suggest that it would be a good idea to have beer. I think that was a really good suggestion. Thank you for making that suggestion. Come back in 2 weeks' time when it's also this time of day, and I might do the same thing again. So thank you for watching, everyone. And I'll do it earlier in my day. So probably about 10 hours earlier, 9 hours earlier on Friday next week. And cheers. See you later. Have a good weekend.